I now have the privilege of inviting up 3 more panelists. You've already met one of them, Carl Bass and Zoe Baird, and Thad Starner are going to join me along with some new chairs here. And when they come up, I'll give a little intro bio to each of them. Let's see, over here. Zoe, good to see you.
Want me on the end? Since the others are the speakers.
Yeah, sure. Let's get a little closer together here. We don't need to be so far apart.
You sink way back in this.
Hi, Carl.
Thank you.
I'm going to hang on to your chair and plot over.
Here, let's do this because I'll probably try to get a camera. Let's come even
A
further.
little toy here.
There we go.
No.
So let me introduce our panelists here. Let me start with Zoe on the end here, a friend of mine. I've gotten to know her better and better over the past couple of years because she was nice enough to invite me to join her on a initiative she's putting together at the Markle Foundation, where she's the president. And I've just watched her expertly convene an amazing group of people. She has an ability to get experts across a wide variety of fields, not only to show up, but to interact with each other and talk to each other in interesting ways. She's been doing this new initiative on America's future and the networked future, along with Howard Schultz of Starbucks, and I think we may get a chance to talk about that a little bit more in a little while. She has a long bio. I don't want to read it, the whole thing, except to mention she's been at the Council on Foreign Relations, Brookings Institution, served both in the Clinton administration and also in the Bush administration. Let's see, the first Clinton administration and the second Bush administration.
Not full-time.
And has been working a lot of these issues for quite some time. Sitting next to her is Thad Starner, who I haven't known as long, although I really should have, because we were at MIT together over 20 years ago, where he coined the term augmented reality. So when you hear people talking about that, he's the guy, and you can see why. He's wearing his Google Glass right now, which is not something new that he just decided to do for this panel or recently. He's been wearing some variant of augmented reality glasses for, forget this, 21 years, okay? Back at the days of the MIT Media Lab, back when you pasted a big CRT on your forehead, or I don't know, maybe quite like that, but developing it along with working with Sandy Pentland, who you heard from a little bit earlier, and some of the other folks there. He's has over 60 patents. He is this technical lead at Google Glass. He is a professor at the School of Interactive Computing at Georgia Institute of Technology, and has been working on thinking about how these heads-up displays can change the way we do work and interact with the world. And right here is Carl Bass, who you heard ask a question earlier. As he mentioned, he's the president and CEO of a publicly traded company. That company is Autodesk. And part of the way he got to be that was he founded several companies before that, Ithaca Software, E2 Open, which I think they were both bought by Autodesk, right? So that's one way to get to be president of the company. And he's been a good he's been a good friend. Andy and I have learned so much from him. As you'll see, he's got a lot of insight and enthusiasm around not just how technology has changed the world, but what it's doing for jobs. We had a chance to talk to him when we were writing our first book, Race Against the Machine, and more recently with the second machine age. He was nice enough to come up to MIT just recently and share some of his wisdom with the students there. So I'm glad he's able to come to New York as well and tell us a little bit about his thoughts in those areas. So we have a lot of knowledge here in the panel, and I'm going to ask you all to contribute as well. But let me tell Thad that I got these glasses here. And so I just got them. I've had them for about 21 minutes, not 21 days.
We need to get you the prescription pair.
Yes, I know. I don't have the prescription pair, but they work. I can see it all right here. It says, I'm all set here. So it says Google. There's a little thing there, and I guess I can take pictures and things. But I'm sure there's other things I can do. You've got a little more experience here. Tell me what's different about augmented reality versus using my iPhone or my laptop?
Well, basically, the reason when I first started talking about augmented reality, it was the idea of being able to take information to wherever you were doing at the time, something where the computer helps you in your daily life without interfering with your daily life. And I spent a lot of time figuring out why you want a head-up display. Why is this more powerful than current computing? And one day, Larry Page turned to me in the early days of glass and said, well, Thad, what we're doing with glass is reducing the time between intention and action. And I stopped for a second and realized that for 20 years I've been doing all these studies, and Larry had said precisely the right thing. This is the catchphrase.
Is he a smart guy?
Yeah, he's a pretty smart guy. So what Larry meant is that if you reduce the time between your intention to do something and your action of doing it, you significantly give an advantage over every other form of communication. Let me do an example. So we're going to do a study quick with all you out there. This will take 1 minute. I want you to raise your hand if you have a watch on right now, a wristwatch. Okay? Now, keep your hands up. Keep your hand up if you also have a smartphone. Okay, so that's most of you. Now, everybody else look around, see these hands. Okay? Now, we're going to do a study. I'm going to have you do 2 tasks. The first one, after each one, I want you to raise your hand when you're done. Okay? So the first one is, what time is it? Yeah, most of you are about as fast as I am. 5:10 is what I have. Okay? Now, I want you to do the following task and raise your hand when you're done. I want you to tell me, who is the president of Georgia Tech? Okay, I'm done.
You didn't memorize that?
Anyway,
Come on,
yeah.
guys.
Now this is a tech.
Come on, MIT.
This is a tech-savvy audience, and yet most of you haven't even tried to do this. Right? And that kind of shows.
I see a bunch of smartphones out over there.
So,
well, you have another 39 minutes, so keep working on it.
So the thing I'm trying to point out here is that when the time between your intention to do something and your action of doing it, or at least starting it, is longer than 2 seconds, there's a barrier to that information. As a matter of fact, it's a 10x barrier. For you to pull out your cell phone from your pocket, unlock it, and get to the point where you can actually do that query takes on average 23 seconds. For me, it takes on average 2 seconds. Now just talk to our friends at NASDAQ, or I was doing this at Chicago Merck NASDAQ pit, refer to the NASDAQ person. Just ask them the difference between 23 seconds and 2 seconds in providing knowledge. I think that is the fundamental thing we're seeing with computing. Every time we've seen computers get more interactive, tighter to the user, that's when we've had major changes. And the other thing I like to think to liken it to is riding a bicycle. If you're riding a bicycle out here on the New York City streets, and somebody veers in front of you, you don't think about the fact that you're squeezing this lever, which pushes which rotates around a fulcrum, which pulls a cable, which goes next through your body of your bike, goes back and pulls a pair of calipers that squeezes against your tire and stops you. No, you just brake. You just think, you just act through your bicycle. Can we actually make intellectual prostheses through which you think? And that is the difference between wearable computing and every other device out there.
That's pretty good. The other cool thing that I just did is that I can take a picture of you by blinking my right eye. Which I did while you were talking. So they're both pretty cool.
But what you can't do is just pull up someone's bio by looking at them.
Carl, so when you were up at MIT, you were telling us about some amazing things that were happening with technology, and this term I think you coined infinite computing, which is almost as cool as augmented reality, but it'll get there. With
way cooler.
with infinite computing, one of the things that you described being possible to do was that some of the designers you were working with really weren't necessarily designing. They were describing the goals and constraints of what they wanted to create, and then the machine was designing. I mean, that's just weird. Can you tell us how that happens?
Yeah, sure. But it starts with this basic idea. You know, in some ways, even in augmented reality, you have to start with this idea that we've treated computing as a scarce resource. Mm-hmm. And we've treated it as though it's precious. So, for example, it sits there all the time, whether it's blinking my eye or clicking a mouse or typing on a keyboard, it's doing nothing most of the time. And the idea is, can we have the computer, first of all, do preemptive computing?
Preemptive computing, that's another good word.
Exactly. So
what does that mean?
So like, for example, you ever have, let's use a really simple example. You ever you're editing an image on any number of programs, and you want to go clockwise or this way and turn it around, it shows you a silly little arrow, and all of us have spent about 23 seconds going, do I want it clockwise or counterclockwise? Why doesn't it just instead show you the two pictures, as if it turned it this way and turned it that way? So when you do that, it would have computed ahead of time, it would have thought about what you might want to do, and do an answer for that. So I think in general, what we've done, we started with mainframes, it was expensive, they were big, they were far away, and we've brought in this mindset that says these things are, we should guard it carefully. And instead what we've done in the engineering domain is said, what if you presume for a second that computing was free? And the idea behind, and it's not so far-fetched. By the way, it's the only asset in the world that gets cheaper over time to solve an engineering problem, and it gets cheaper in a predictable way. So you can graph everything else in the world, and the only thing that's going to go down is computing. And just to put it in real dollars today, a 4-core computer to rent costs about 5 cents. There's nothing else of similar value that you can get for 5 cents. And you have
Where do we rent it for 5 cents?
Amazon. And you can and there's a bunch of other, you can do it from Google, you can do it from Amazon, right? For an hour. And the other part of it is, if I need 10 computers next hour, I can get 10. And if I don't need it for 2 hours, I don't need it. So it's elastic, it can scale to the biggest size problem. So what we've done in the engineering domain is we said, we took this idea and we kind of pushed it to the limit and said, what if you had infinite computing? How would you design and engineer things differently? And today, most engineering problems are solved in a process that I think of like playing the game of Battleship. It's, you design something, and then you say B2, and then you test it, and you say miss. And then you go back and you're thinking about it again, and then you go E3. Miss. And at some point you run out of time or patience or interest or something, and you say, this is good enough, let's ship it. And instead, it's true. But many engineering problems exist in limited domains. So let's just start with the simplest problem of saying, in a traditional trade-off between, let's say, strength and weight and cost, why instead of exploring 2 or 3 or 5 or however many before you lose interest, why don't you explore all 10,000, 100,000, 10 million possibilities? And you can do it cleverly through statistical techniques. Find the best answer, find the optimal answer, find the near optimal answer. And so we started to do that, and it turned out to be a really good idea. You could give people answers that were really close. And
well, that's a little abstract. So give us a specific example.
So we went one step further, where we said we were working with an aerospace company, and they're really interested in putting less weight into the air over the lifetime of the craft that John's company buys. If you put up 1 less pound, it matters, and so they're always trying to make them lighter. So, for example, we worked with a company on a bracket, and we said, here's what we want to do. It has to be mounted in these 4 places. It can fill a space envelope about this big, and it has to support that load. And we gave it a specified load. And what was really interesting about it, we let the computer run for thousands of hours. So we had thousands of core hours running, and we came up with a design that was better than anything that had been designed before, and it was not intuitive.
It was just kind of testing all these variations to fit the constraints.
Right, so basically what it would do, it would come up with an answer, it would look at it and say, it has more than enough material here, not enough material there. So it adds some, just think of like taking little pieces of gum and gluing it on in a digital sense, and getting rid of the places where it didn't matter, and it'd do it over and over again, and after thousands and thousands and thousands of iterations, it came up with a really good answer. And we were totally surprised by the answers it came up with. What was really funny is, when we showed it to the company, they said, well, could it get even better than this? So we said, well, this was the limits you told us. And they said, well, you know where that limit came from? I said, no, you were the ones who told us. They said, well, we built the first one and we measured it, and that became the standard for the last 20 years. And they said, why don't you go back and try and see if you could do it? And we did, and of course, it got better.
And this was a design that you don't think any human would have come up with? It was...
I think the two things are true. One is I don't think a human could have come up with it. And number two, without applying microprocessors to manufacturing techniques. Some of the stuff that John was describing, CNC machines and additive manufacturing like 3D printing, you couldn't have fabricated it before. So we're now having engineers specify things that are designed by the computer and actually made by the computer.
Remarkable.
I don't think that leads to more jobs in engineering.
Yeah.
We're doing something similar, but for dolphin vocalizations. We're actually using a lot of computing power. We're working with marine mammalogists, and they really want to know what the fundamental unit of these dolphin vocalizations are. And what we've been doing is just using these discovery algorithms to just run over large databases and keep on pulling up, hey, how about this explanation? How about this explanation? And then the human says, I like this one. This one explains my observations. So you just use the computer to quickly test.
They're kind of teaming up there,
Yeah.
which is a good example.
Yeah.
So Zoe, you've heard examples like this, because I've been with you as you brought in some technologists, but you're also hearing from people in labor and sociology and union leaders and others that are concerned about some of the opportunities that are created, but also some of the challenges in this new initiative that you and Howard are pursuing. Tell us a little bit about what motivated you to decide that this was the big challenge that you thought the Markle Foundation should go after, and what you see both the challenge and the opportunity there.
I was wondering how you're going to make the bridge from what they're doing to what I'm doing. Actually,
I should have had a
That
robot
was
would have tried
good.
all the possible.
That was very good. It shows you can dance and use Google Glass at the same time.
By the way, if I wink at you, I'm not flirting. I'm just taking.
I know you're taking pictures. You're actually, I've noticed this, but I also would say that you're also not concentrating on what somebody's saying.
This is really cool. Sorry, I should probably take it off.
There are really good studies now about the negative side of multitasking, too.
It's a newbie
We should
effect.
talk about that.
Right, it's a
It
newbie
gets-
effect. Well,
it
I
gets
just
better
said to
about
him
an
what
hour.
I want Google Glass to do when I've used Google Glass. I really want it to, this is the human side of the technology that I focus on. This will make you remember the difference between how we think about the world. I really want Google Glass to tell me who this guy is in the second row when I look at him. And we've had facial recognition technology for 20 years. I want it to tell me who he is.
Bad? Oh.
And Thad said, oh, that's creepy when I said that to him.
A better way to do this is to actually look at people's Bluetooth SSIDs and pull up a name and their photo that they publish next to it. And you show that for the people nearby you, and then it helps you remember the person's name using your own brain. It's a cognitive aid.
I'm sure that would be really valuable, but if that guy asks me a question, I'd like to know who's asking me the question more than what he tells me. Anyway, the work...
Put it on your to-do list, Thad.
Right. No, he told me it was creepy. He doesn't want to do it. And that was the same reaction I got from the person at Google who showed me Google Glass.
Creepy.
But these technologies that they're talking about, and I really have learned a lot from Carl. I talked to you 2 years ago, I think, when we were first thinking about this initiative, and from Erik and Andy, who've been great guides to us. These technologies are undoubtedly of extraordinary value, and I have spent much of my career in trying to be a catalyst for the deployment of technology to transform sectors. And I'll just take healthcare, which is one area where we worked in for a long time, and I think really had a significant impact in taking that lagging industry and improving the prospects of it being a robust place where technology is used. I mean, Google Glass, to me, would be fabulous if a paraprofessional is sitting with a patient in their home and trying to help them solve their problems, and that someone who doesn't have an MD but has the access to information at their fingertips, either what something looks like, so maybe I don't get to find out who he is, but if he's got a lesion on him and I can point my Google Glass at that, and that can connect me to some other pictures of lesions and possibly tell me what it is. Carl's work, I mean, aside from Avatar, which is one of the greatest things he's ever done in my book, that kind of work of using 3D printing to be able to take a real body part and replicate it in its opposite form to replace a missing body part, whether it be reconstructing a face or a leg or a limb, I think it's extraordinary, and we should all be so enormously grateful for the social benefit from that. So why is it that people like Erik and Andy are so worried about these technologies? And the reason, I mean, I'm sure you've heard today, I wasn't here to hear it one more time, but I could probably give their speeches for them by now. I've had the pleasure of hearing so many times. You heard about the Tuna Can today?
No.
No? Oh, no.
Maybe later. You can tell it.
I'll tell you about the Tuna Can.
Okay,
This is
Google.
Andy and Eric's Tuna
What is
Can.
the Tuna Can story?
Right. Let's see if we get it. So the Tuna Can is basically one of their latest ways of describing how technology and, I would emphasize globalization equally, are flattening the middle class, leaving economic prospects with the top end of the economic spectrum and the low end, because there are always certain low-end services that can't be replaced.
Today at lunch, I showed you the bowl. Remember that bowl that I showed you from David Otter? And you could imagine that becoming less of a bowl, and as Zoe's saying, a little bit more of a tuna can.
Yeah, I mean, it's their story. I'm just repeating it since you didn't hear it. I thought you would have heard it. So indeed, what has happened, and their data shows that almost 70% of Americans have seen a decline in real wages in this economic recovery, first time since World War II, that it's been such an unevenly distributed economic recovery, nothing comparable. More than 65% of Americans think the country's on the wrong track, and this is not healthy for sustaining the economic investment and prospects of this country, let alone for our openness to being part of a global community. So we have been working with extraordinary people, including this initiative on the digital economy, to try to capitalize on technology and globalization and find ways to, with intention, with vision, to have that benefit people more broadly, particularly in this country, but in engaging with other countries. And I'll just quickly mention two of the key areas where I hope each of you in the worlds that you're living in will think about how you can contribute to this. One is scaling startups and small to medium-sized enterprises so that they employ more people. And why don't we have very significant strategies for this? We're really playing around the edges. We talk about, should there be more capital investments? Immigration policy is obviously extremely important. But we don't have a grand vision of what it would mean to really scale our economy with more startups and the growth of small and medium-sized enterprises. And we see some real prospects for this. In this country, we have a surplus in trade and services and a deficit in trade and manufactured goods. And we have only begun to use the technology platforms that are available to us to find the market needs in other countries and scale our capacity to export services into those countries, to create global enterprises out of individuals who are personal trainers at home, who find people in China who need a personal trainer and they train them over YouTube, to find ways to scale markets for medium-sized businesses who don't think that they can engage in international trade, that there are too many barriers. We've begun to do this, but the opportunities are tremendous. Now, there are intellectual property issues. Carl and I have talked about it. Businesses like his are not going to be on the front lines of this, but there are many, many businesses that can be, and a lot of the trade barriers don't exist when you do trade over the internet. Much of the world is growing in its urban areas and its own growing middle class, and they're putting a lot of pressures on their government to bring in healthcare to China, to bring in architectural services, construction services. And so this is one area where we think that there is prospect for the economy through this combination of globalization and technology. Prospects we didn't have 20 years ago. We need people to create platforms to do the back office work for all these small to medium-sized enterprises, people who understand taxation and customs and compliance. But those are all opportunities for this country. So that's one area. Open data is another area that can contribute enormously to scaling small to medium-sized enterprises, and you've probably talked about that a lot. I don't want to go into each of these in the same depth because of time. And similarly, there are new opportunities now for capital investment, whether you like crowdfunding or you like syndicating capital investment or you like some of the lending platforms, the possibilities we need to really develop more robust opportunities for capital investments in these kinds of businesses. So that's one area where we think technology can be an enormous contributor that we really haven't had a strategy to exploit in this country, let alone identify the catalyst to create the conditions to make it happen. And just briefly, the other area that we think is also enormously significant, which MIT has been on the front lines of the Media Lab for a very long time, and that's personalizing education and training. And the opportunity now to set aside those universal degrees in a world of distribution and granularity. Education's the lagging sector, and it's not just K-12 education or university education, it's training in the very specific skills you need for any of these people. If Carl could hire someone without looking at whether they have an MIT degree, but whether they have the 4 things he most needs for the particular job he wants, and he can get that validated, whether it be through a certificate or ratings by other people or whatever, he'd be much happier and have a, and then we have metrics loops on whether these things are actually predictors of success, and all of that can be done in the same seconds we do trading. So why not do it for talent? Mm-hmm. Companies can reinvigorate the notions of apprenticeships and training cycles. So somebody's not doing really well in a job, how can we evaluate that person using technology tools and understand what they are good at and decide if we want to retrain them and have them be the best person at something that the box didn't fit? That's what we're doing in every other sphere, so why not do it with human talent? So those are a couple of the major areas that we're investing in.
That's a great litany. I hope somebody was recording all that. I don't know, but that's a really interesting list. Let me pick up on one of you. You touched on a number of them. Actually, Carl, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the maker movement, because one of the other things that I've been fascinated about is when you showed me all the 3D printed objects. If you guys haven't been to Autodesk headquarters, there's like a museum of amazing artifacts that have been 3D printed, things you never could imagine just physically could be created in any way, and they're there and you can touch them and feel them. But I'm not going to ask you specifically about the technology so much, but what it means in terms of work and employment, the kinds of people who are getting engaged. It seems like there's a different kind of community that's being energized around the design and then the creation of things.
I mean, certainly there's this incredible movement going on around the maker movement. But I think there's a more important conclusion from it. But as an example, we've sold design and engineering software for years, and if you count like number of hamburgers sold, we had sold 15 million pieces of software, which was the most in our industry. About 3 years ago, we decided to start making free software, but it was for hobbyists and people DIY and makers.
Free design software.
Free design software. But I mean, you have to be wanting to make something in order to use this. In 3 years, 160 million people have started to use this software.
Wow.
So from 30 years to go to 15 million, 3 years for 160 million. And all of a sudden we realized out there was this latent need to create and do stuff, and it was kind of amazing.
What's the kind of person? That's a lot of people. I mean, there's not that many industrial designers in the world, as far as I know. So who is using this software? What kind of thing? Okay, there's one right over there.
But it's a lot. It was totally surprising. It was everybody. It was a cross section. Some of them were professional customers by day and did this on the weekend. It was people working with their kids. It was moms and dads. I mean, it's 160 million people. I mean, just to put it in perspective, and then I'll get back to there. Like, we have this website. It's called Instructables. I don't know if anyone's ever seen Instructables. There are some people. Okay, it's how to make stuff. It's the story of how to make stuff. It's everything from making a cupcake to making a thermonuclear device in your backyard. Okay. And everything in between.
What's the URL for that?
It's just go to Instructables. You can search for everything.
USPTO.gov.
Yeah, exactly. 25 million people a month go to this website, which I would have thought was kind of a niche market. So anyhow, there's something incredible going on in the maker's market. But the thing that I've actually been more impressed with, and I saw it a lot when I was in Cambridge, for the last 3 days, is there's this next level, and a lot of people are calling it like hardware startups, and the popular version of hardware startups these days are, of course, things like Nest and Oculus.
Yep.
But if you want to look at the...
Very popular.
Well, very expensive. I don't know. We'll see how popular they turn out to be. But if you go back and you look, there are thousands and thousands of companies now making hardware products. I saw dozens of them while I was in Boston. It's happening not only in the United States, it's happening worldwide. It's about access to markets, access to capital, low barriers to entry around hardware and software components that you can easily throw together. So there's something really interesting happening. I think the maker movement is interesting in that it's given people the seed to start it. But I think this hardware startup is actually going to have a much more dramatic economic impact. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm excited when I see. One quick story, I saw this, and this was a typical hardware startup, and it combines with 3D printing. There's a company I'm marginally involved with, but I got involved only because I was so excited. It's called Cambrian Genomics. They 3D print DNA. So I walked in there the first day, and there's a thing that looks more like a MakerBot, and the guy starts telling me, and I'm like, slow way down. I don't understand what you're talking about. And I say, just let's start. There are 4 tubes going in. What's in the tubes? And the guy goes, A, T, C, and G.
That's awesome.
And I'm like, okay, that's slow enough. I get it. Now, how do you turn that into printed DNA? The end result was, what amazed me about it is they're just about to start commercially producing DNA, and they believe they will produce more DNA in a single batch than the world currently produces in aggregate.
Are they using this DNA like structurally, or are they using it
They're
for
using
genetics and genetic
scientific
information?
experiments, programming. There's some great work going in this other school in Boston is doing some.
Another school?
There's another school in Boston doing they're building it's a nanoscale robot. That goes in,
out of DNA or
out of DNA.
Yeah.
DNA uses a structural component. It has this interesting property of emergent behavior. If you take the right strands and throw them in a beaker and just shake it, it automatically makes that shape. And you put this thing in, it has like a hinge and a clasp on a microscale, and when it attaches to a cell,
Oh my God.
it opens and delivers a payload of drugs.
Wow.
Okay, so that's the work going on at that other school, but the raw material is made by these guys. What was interesting to me about the startup is they have about 9 people. None of them are expert in the same things. There's a geneticist, there's a guy who's an expert in optics, one a mechanical engineer. So very diverse skills, very little overlap, incredibly diverse backgrounds, and 9 people and less than $2 million, and they're producing more DNA than anyone in the world.
Just to make you feel better,
Yeah.
there was an MIT professor doing this when I was a freshman in '87 at MIT.
Really?
Yeah, he was describing this process to me.
Yeah, so it's kind of incredible, but to me, the idea that 9 people can go out and change the world in that way is really encouraging for the kinds of things that Zoe was talking about in terms of having dramatic economic impact.
You guys are so interesting. I feel bad monopolizing because I know that there's people out here in the audience who would like to ask questions of all of you. So while you formulate your question, let me just ask Thad a question. I'll ask you 2 questions. You get to choose. First, I'd be interested in knowing how you use the software, the CAD software, and what kinds of things you're designing. Just gives a concrete examples. I'd also be interested in having you respond to Zoe's idea about using augmented reality, for home health aids or other kinds of purposes, where you could use it to allow people to be valuable as laborers or workers in ways that they couldn't have previously.
Right. Well, first of all, I run the rapid prototyping lab at Georgia Tech. It's down in my basement. We started with a 3D printer about 10 years ago, and we keep on expanding it every year, allowing students to actually come in and make their own stuff. And it's all student tech fee money, and so they can actually take that and take it to VCs or the entrepreneurship competitions. It's their stuff. And so they're using this sort of software to make things quick and dirty to do prototypes.
Cool.
And of course, I use it myself in making the wearable computers I do.
Yeah, that's how you design some of the next generation.
Some of the stuff that's, at Google, I actually have real engineers doing this. At Georgia Tech, I am doing it myself, which is not nearly as pretty.
My money's on you.
Now, as far as using, you get people who want to do like what you did with trying to do these applications, like the face recognition thing, right? It turns out that if you actually do that, it's a very bad experience. It's just that from the user standpoint, it doesn't work like you think it would. And so one of the things you find out is it's good to rapidly iterate on some of these ideas. Just get something out there, try it, figure out what it's going to be like, and then figure out where the real nubbin of problems that you can solve are with this sort of thing. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we're seeing one of the glassware startups do is a fitness app where it's, I just saw this other day, where it actually gives you little training videos of how to do particular yoga poses properly. And it also keeps counts of reps of exercises. And you're always trying to compete with yourself to improve your own health. And it turns out it's surprisingly compelling.
Yeah. It's better than having it on your iPhone and kind of glancing down?
Because, again, it's the access time. When it's here, right, you can do these micro-interaction exercises.
Gotcha.
Right? You have a few minutes.
Yep.
It might ping you and say, oh, yeah, I can do a couple lunges right now. Why not? And so that 30 seconds you have, I'm a fencer, okay? I like, anyways. So
I just had this urge to get up and do a lunge, but I'll resist.
here we go. We can, somebody have some epes? That's my weapon.
I must be on that suggestibility range that John was putting up.
But you can actually use small breaks throughout the day to actually improve your fitness. And having this here means that you have access to that very quickly, and it's sort of a gamification of it.
Yes.
Just using the sensors in the device. We're seeing people like, one of the things that really got me was a firefighter. His name was Patrick Jackson. He saw glass and then realized that what he wanted it for was to get alerts in the fire hall.
Yeah.
They get an alert. They all run to the rec room to look on the big screen to see what the alert is, and then they run to the pole to go to the alert. Now they get the alert here, and they're running for the pole. Right? It actually saves them significant amounts of time just in responding. The thing that I thought was brilliant was he says, okay, Glass, show me the cut points on a Ford Explorer 2001.
Cut points.
Cut points. So you have the jaws of life.
Oh.
You got somebody stuck
Because you have to,
inside.
you're a firefighter, you have to know how to open it up.
You have to know how to open up all these different makes and models of cars. So instead of paging through a manual or guessing, you have it right in your head of display.
How long before we think people, not just me and you, but like half the audience will be using some next generation of one of these devices? Do you see that happening?
Well, one of the things, if you go back and look at our publications when we were up at MIT,
Yeah.
The thing we said would first take off is an MP3 player. Because the Media Lab was on that standards committee to actually do MPEG.
An MP3 player is kind of a early form of...
It was a wearable computer. It's what we classify as a wearable computer. It's a computer you wear on the body. It's designed to be used while you're doing other things.
Right, that's true.
And one of the things I remember very distinctly having this conversation with Sony about, hey, I have this computer here. It's about this big. It's actually smaller than your Discman. And it can contain an entire CD worth of music. And disk spaces are doubling every 18 months, actually doubling every 12 months at that point. Pretty soon I'll have the entire music library in something smaller than you can do on one Discman. Why aren't you guys should do this?
Yeah.
They were a sponsor. And the response from Sony was, we can't do that. We just bought Columbia Records. We think doing that will encourage piracy.
Oh my God.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
I didn't expect the company that would actually sort of break this monopoly would be Apple and Google.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a surprise to me.
Well, let's get some questions. Let's keep the questions quick and short, and we'll get as many in as we can. So how about right over here in the front?
Hi, Melissa Marsh, Course 4 graduate, do architecture and workplace design. We've been talking today about our devices. We heard from Andrew McAfee about a shift from experts to geeks and presumably the analytics. And we've also spoken about social metrics. Then Google bought Nest and Intel bought Basis. So we have probably some emerging social data. This is a little bit, I think, for Carl. But do you see emerging data sets for better predicting building performance from a human factors and people perspective?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Sensors are being put in buildings all over. There was a question before about when I was asking about stock ownership and what would you do differently. There's the same problem of assembling this data into something useful, but in almost every building, we're simultaneously heating and cooling the building. Right now, somewhere in this room is air conditioned, there's somewhere else we're heating it. and we don't even build the systems well. And I think it's gonna have a huge impact on how buildings are designed. And when you look at big problems in the world, people immediately jump to cars as being the source of carbon emissions and therefore climate change. Buildings are a much bigger problem and probably a much more solvable problem. So I think it's huge. Modern buildings are all being filled with sensors, but people still aren't building the systems necessarily to do something with the data yet.
Let's get some more questions in. Where's the mic? How about over, is someone? No, all right, over here, right there.
Hi, Jack Hittery. Question about education. Erik, you brought up Maker Faire. And Maker Faire, anyone who's been to a Maker Faire knows how exciting kids get when they go to Maker Faire, excited about science, excited about technology. Look at US First Robotics, same thing. But both those are really outside the school realm, right? They're on weekends, they're at nights, they're after school. Given how, and even Instructables, of the 25 million users, I'm sure many of those are kids downloading stuff on their own time. So on the one hand, we know that all this stuff is super exciting, gets kids engaged in science and tech and STEM. On the other hand, 90% of kids during 90% of the time in school doing boring memorization, rote learning kind of stuff. What will it take to kind of change this river and the inertia we have in our main school day and actually begin to change the main school day with the stuff we now know works after school?
Zoe, you want to take that first?
Sure, Jack, I didn't know you went to MIT. Look, at my view is you bypass existing institutions and the existing institutions change. So I think the kinds of things that Sol Khan is doing, the things that are like what the Chinese do where, you do your learning at home and your homework in school, I think those kinds of things will put pressure on our existing educational institutions, and I know you've invested a lot of your time in thinking about how the government can change these things, but my own view is that the government will only be able to change those things once we bypass those institutions. And you look at like Coursera, and now Rick Levin's going to be CEO of Coursera and is giving it the validation of the former president of Yale, and that's what's going to change higher ed. Even though there's spectacular things happening at this institution in terms of online courses and training those who aren't going for MIT degrees, the real pressure to start giving micro MIT degrees are going to come when organizations like Coursera are giving certificates, and the same thing's going to happen, in my judgment, at the K-12 level.
Terrific.
Sure. Just one thing quickly. Nice to see you. But the thing that I think that's really interesting in the switch of reversing classrooms is, and you see it at MIT, there's a lot you can do online. This experiential learning, which is really what you're getting at, and I think is really the key to excite people. Yep. It's actually the motivation for why do I want to learn what's in the book. I want to learn thermodynamics so that I can make my electric go-kart go faster. It's often not the other way around.
Right.
And we presume it's, I want to learn, and then I'm going to figure out what to do with all this thermodynamics. And, and when you think about it that way, institutions, because people have asked the question, so what happens to the institution? I think they're the perfect places for people to come together and do that. And take the other kind of road, the book learning, which turns into online learning, and do it online. And by the time I come to class, I know why and what I want to do.
Yeah, one of the things we're doing.
How about right over here? Quick question.
One
of the things you brought up in the book was basic income, if you guys could riff on that.
A basic income. Does anyone else want to talk about basic income and negative income tax? I can, but I don't know.
Oh, negative income tax?
Yeah, negative income tax.
You're the economist.
Well, so let me say something brief about it. One of the concerns that we have that Carl and Zoe brought up in particular was what happens when some of the jobs, some of the middle income and low skill jobs are disappearing. They can be done better by machines and soon other jobs as well. What do you do about income and the distribution of income? In the book, we looked at what would happen in terms of providing a basic income, and we looked at that as a possibility, and that's become much more widely considered going forward. We were very convinced by some of the work of Bob Putnam, who we met through Zoe's initiative, about the importance of work as well, that when work leaves a community, it doesn't just cut the income, which is something you can repair and replace, but it also has a whole set of social ills that go with it. You know, drug use, divorce, teen pregnancy, crime. There are a whole bunch of other indicators that turn south. And so we're particularly interested in exploring the idea of like a negative income tax, earned income tax credit that would reward people for working, and it would help with the income distribution, but also do it in a way that brought more work into a community and provide more incentives for individuals to work and also for companies to hire people. So that's something we want to work on going forward, is working through the economics of that kind of a system. Right now, sadly, our government and our systems in most countries really do essentially the opposite, which is they tax employment, they tax labor. There are extra mandates and costs, retirement and health and other things, that if you employ somebody, you have to pay. And one of the oldest rules of economics is that if you want less of something, you tax it. If you want more of something, you subsidize it. So right now, we sort of have it the wrong way around. In the language of economics, there's a positive externality to having people work that goes beyond just the income that they get. And that's why having some kind of a system that encourages that would be something we'd like to explore and flesh out further. I have to be clear, though, that it's not something we've worked out the details in much at all. It's something we talk about in the book as pointing to some people who have been thinking about it. And one of the things the Initiative on the Digital Economy may do is think more broadly about those kinds of social policies and how technology may demand or enable ways of doing that going forward.
It seems to me, though, if I was a company, I could actually hire people at low wages so I basically get subsidized labor.
Yes.
And so I end up with these companies paying substandard wages and people on food stamps.
Right. And,
basically.
And that's true. And a lot of people see that as a negative. Depending on how you think about it, it might be a feature, because right now we punish companies who hire low-income people, and we say, we don't want you providing those kinds of jobs. It's not so obvious that we want to be doing. Maybe we should be rewarding people for hiring people, even if they can't justify the full $10, $12, $15 an hour wage. If they can justify part of it, 6 or 8 of it, then maybe the government should be making up the difference of it.
Yeah,
so that's the argument.
One of the things I'd love you guys to study is this idea of taxing productivity. And in your thing, it's going to discourage it, but if the force is strong enough, productivity is going to win out. It seems to me like there's nothing sacred about income tax. So if I decide to put more robots in my factory, tax me for putting the robots in there, as opposed to taxing the people.
Yeah, there are a lot. I mean, and so there are value-added taxes. There are taxes on carbon and land and other things that we could tax. And if you do the math, it looks like you can put together a package of taxes and essentially eliminate taxes on labor if you did it the right way around. So this is something that would be very interesting to explore. You know, we made some huge changes in our education policy, our tax policy, our organization, antitrust in the first machine age, when the economy moved from mostly agricultural to industrial and service. It would be surprising if we didn't need to make some comparably large changes going forward. But first, we need to think through the implications of it. They may have some adverse side effects in terms of what happens to work and income, or they may have some beneficial ones, and we need to think those through. But unfortunately, with me talking, we are out of time here. I'm looking at the blinking light up there. But I want to thank the panelists. That was a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate you coming and sharing some of your wisdom with me.
And thank you for Google Glass.